Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're talking about modern tactics and strategies, implications on the physical demand. So a real view on sort of the physical outlook of players during this period, but linked to tactics and strategies. Today we've got Stuart Delaney, Mick Matthews and Matt Portas from the education team. And we've also got Matthew Ramsbaum, who's in the back, looking after us, making sure everything's all right. So welcome. Hopefully you find this interesting. We're just going to start with a little bit sort of things we're going to talk about today. So what are the technical requirements of players to perform tactically in the game? So we've talked a lot about what is tactically desirable, what is technically achievable, but to link that there as well, what is physically achievable? So what must be physically achievable with it? So hopefully we can highlight things and just get a little bit of thinking between you and ourselves about actually what is going to go on. So we're going to start with a little video. So hopefully this gives you a little view and a little insight to what we're going to be talking about today. So it's from last year's Wolves v Man City. Hopefully we're just going to have a little focus on Wolves at this moment in time. Wolves defensively, predominantly a lot of the time, do a low block and stay in that low block. Their percentage of teams entering their defensive third is very high, that low block. But what are the physical implications between that?
I think first up, from my point of view, Hint, you can see straight away those spaces between players is really, really tight, isn't it?
I think it is. I think it is there. And then you look at that, all players back in own defending third. I think we'll touch on that a little bit later. That is a massive physical output from there. I don't know, Matt's talking about that the narrow and cracked spaces, but that can conserve energy as well. Am I correct there, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of one of the benefits from a physical point of view is obviously it makes it tight for the opposition to play around. But if a player does need to close some space, that space isn't very much. So actually you're helping your players to conserve energy by keeping those spaces between players and lines tight.
So if we're linking that to tactically, is that a tactical thing that they do, that it is all back, all compact, very compact, hard to beat, but narrow spaces which allow that sort of resting period during the game, so they can get their energy back up, ready for that sort of counter-attack when they recover the ball.
And I think as well, when you think about it, Craig, it's we often talk about it's the hardest part of the game is running out of possession. So if you can make those spaces as small as possible, perhaps that makes it more achievable for the players.
Yeah. I think now that control and restraint to allow that, they cover all those 5 lanes. If we link into that little England DNA, nice and compact, everyone's back in, looking for that turnover and possession. Hard to beat, narrow spaces, able to cover ground quickly to stop lines being broken. Then it's that transition of that quick attack. There we go. That just shows it, that little diagram there. Compact, tight spaces there, cutting off passing lines through. Yeah. Waiting for that one opportunity.
And that's really interesting as well, isn't it? That, we often talk about it, don't we? The small games within games, that 5v4 there, the overload that you've highlighted. What are the implications that in terms of if you are working at this level, getting the players fit to be able to work within those spaces? But if you're working in development, not just thinking about the 11v11 game, but what are the physical demands of players playing a small part of the game in those tight spaces?
And I think it links back to if you've not got much space as well, when you're practicing, your designs are practicing around that, what can you get out of it? Can you still have an impetus? Can you still have a reasoning behind why you're doing those small games? And I think that's just prime example of what you said spot on about that game within the game. Yeah. And how we make that effective.
Yeah, and I think we'll have a bit more of a discussion on this later in the webinar. you just see physically there's lots of kind of readjusting of position, but because they're so tight and compact, there's not massive amounts of movement, is there? There's certainly bits of high intensity movement when you're near the ball, but it's short spaces, it's short bursts. So it's helping the defending players conserve energy. The challenge comes when you have to try and get out. I think that's the point you're going to come to.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Shortly. I think that even looking at there, the distance between what Jimenez there is going to affect the ball there. I think if we just look there, he's probably 10, 12 yards off the 18-yard box. So he's probably 30 yards away from the goal.
Yeah.
From, his own goal.
Yeah. What sort of profile of player are you thinking about that needs to play in this sort of formation then, and what are you thinking about?
Well, I think I looked at it, say, what's it mean? And then it's sort of implications, physical output from actually playing, and that transition. They work a lot on that transition there. What do players need to enable them to do what they do? So we're looking at back slip there, that back clip, where we've paused it then just a minute. Jimenez is 12 yards off his 18-yard box. So if that's, I'll put 35 yards there, so he's 35 yards there. He's 35 yards. He's still technically got 80 yards to go to the next goal, to their goal.
Yeah.
Even with Doherty there, one of the wing backs, Johnny Otto playing on the left-hand side as a wing back as well.
Yeah.
If he's in a deep position, he could have up to 97 yards to get to their goal. So how does that have physical implications for what they want to do?
Yeah, well, clearly, if you defend in this way and you want to have an impact on the opposition offensively when you've got the ball in possession, you're going to have some players who can get from back to front very quickly, aren't you? So, top speed, high acceleration, players who've got bags of energy to be able to get there and get back into shape when you do lose the ball. So it's going to require certain players in your team, usually the players in wide positions, to have kind of some good high speed, which we see in the Wolves team, don't we? Yeah. But also that ability to repeatedly do that, so recover from the high speed bout and then go again when required. But I talked about the wide players, but even the centre forward in that graphic you've got there is 25 yards inside his own half, 20 yards inside his own half. So again, having players who've got not just are up there as a pivot, but they've got to have that the energy to be able to recover into shape and then support the counter attack and then get back into shape again as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that's what we talked about earlier about that conserving the energy when they're in the block. With those spaces, they've got the five at the back, which are covering all those sort of five lanes. What we're talking about, they've got the three in midfield there, the two predominantly sitting, then the one will drop in to make that three. Yeah. So that's where they conserve their energy. Jimenez, Jota will drop in just to conserve energy, but then they've got explosive energy and to get forward. And normally with Wolves, they will attack with five, so they'll do the two wing backs, the three midfielders, and the two forwards, depending on what formation, how that formation looks. Yeah. So you'll probably find that the three centre halves probably only push up so far and join in, where the two midfielders probably just hold as well. So they're box to box as well a little bit. They probably don't go in the box as much. Neves, Martino probably don't go into the box as much, but they've still got to make that distance up. Yeah, so they're still making a good 60, 65 yards each attack. Yeah. So what sort of players, we've looked at player profiles and what fits the needs. So we sort of looked into a new player they bought, sort of, not new player now, but one that they bought. So we're looking, well, why might have they bought him? I know Adam Traore attacking now. I think we picked up these little stats there about he's got 145 successful take-ons in the 28 Premier League games this season. On average, beats his man at 5.7 per game. So his impetus just to get up the pitch just gives him that chance to get up and catch up. Well, try and catch him up because he's a bit of a whippet. But he gets past people, so he breaks that line. It allows people to get up the pitch and move up the pitch. And I think when you look at it that successfully wise, 145's not bad, and it's one of those that if you do get the ball to him, you can rely on to get him up the pitch. But defensively as well, he's improving that game as well, which is when he's coming back into sort of that low block or that defensive block to allow him to do it. And I know you've got a great little story, Matt, about him there, about what working with him before.
Yeah, well, I've seen him before. I've seen him in his development before he got to Wolves on several occasions, and to say that he's a whippet is probably an understatement. He's probably the quickest footballer I've ever seen.
He could catch pigeons, couldn't he, to be fair?
Absolutely, and I think the benefit that then brings to a team who play in the way that Wolves play gives you exactly what we talked about in that previous slide around, having somebody who can actually cover the distance. But what he does there, you can see from the stats, his take-ons and be able to, with the ball, beat an opponent. So, he's bringing the ball out, he can beat an opponent. And I've never seen many players who can run with the ball as quickly as he can. So if you've got him carrying the ball for you at speed, that gives the other players the opportunity to counter-attack maybe through the centre and the other side of the field without the ball. So they're maybe not as quick as him, but he's carrying the ball for you. It means that your counter-attacks can be lightning quick. I think in terms of this player's development, he's always had those unbelievable physical characteristics. But what's really helped is, two of the coaches that he had prior to coming to Wolves really helped him with his game understanding, particularly the defensive aspect of the game, and you can probably see that coming out in some of the stats there that you've got on the screen. And then the talented medical and science staff that worked with him previously identified that he needed some help in understanding that raw pace that he's got, and they actually brought somebody in to help him learn how to control his speed and not always go at 100%. I think that's a really important point to make when you're trying to link the physical and the technical and tactical corner. This guy was so quick that sometimes it was too quick for him to make decisions. And if he goes at 80%, he can potentially beat most opponents, and then he's got more time to pick out what he's going to do and more time to execute what he's going to do. And once he learned how to control those raw qualities, we saw his his stats, his assists, his goal scoring increasing, and his impact on the game increase immeasurably. So I think that's a really interesting case study that you've brought up there, because once he's got to beyond this 200 games, he's 23, 24 now. He's past that 200 game mark in his senior career, and you can start to see that level of consistency coming out. He's got the raw physical talent, but he's also starting to, he's certainly improved that technical and tactical understanding of his game as well.
And I think as well, he's higher than Messi as well. I think with attacking take on. So I think Messi's about 118, 128. So I think it's one of them that he's effective. But I think him coming into the side as well, they've got Jimenez as well, where you look at player profiles physically, he's big, strong lad, good in the air, can hold the ball up well, which just allows those times as well to get players at the pitch and bring other players in. So those physical profile I think it always comes back to going into your context about how you want to play and how it links to what you do. So is this your style of play? How are you going to play it? What fits into what you believe in and what you want to achieve? Because if you've got those, that's only hopefully going to build you on success.
Massively. I just think, can you put the video back on, Craig, and we'll bring the other lads in and see what their thoughts are.
Of course I can.
Mick, Stu, as you're watching this and hearing the conversation, any thoughts that are coming through your mind?
I think from mine, I'm not sure if this is this sort of highlighted sort of information on Connor Cody. You see him on the sort of left or in the centre of that back three there.
Yeah.
So I know that we maybe got a bit of telestrated footage as we move on. So it might be worthwhile just waiting till we get that one on.
Yeah.
But I think it's a link really with. You mentioned about an integration there, Matt, around technical, tactical, as well as physical. I think it's important to just consider that cognitive side of it as well. So as you know, he's looking for sort of what's the most useful patterns and cues that are going on around him, then triggers.
Yeah.
So as you know, that searching for information then gets logged into that decision, which ultimately sort of shapes his actions.
Yeah.
I think it's a big key part of how often do we not look at that sort of preparation beforehand, which then will initiate the action that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you've mentioned cognitive there, what just sprung to my mind as well is, this, when we talked about this kind of the gaps, and it kind of helps the players to concert. It only works if people are switched on and in the right positions. So the concentration and making sure they're disciplined and being in the position that they're meant to be in. If they're not, then that adds to the physical work that them or one of their teammates has to do. So for this to work for the whole team, people have got to stay switched on and focused and understand their role and be committed to doing that from a psychological point of view as well.
I suppose that changes under fatigue as well, doesn't it? So can you still do that under fatigue? Can you get that organisation, that balance, that the team are still working in the right position and narrow and compact, so those things don't happen? And Absolutely. Over time, that is hard. If we've had big discussions recently about our players getting fatigued anymore, do we put them through that barrier, that fatigue, to allow it to happen?
Yeah, and more games are being decided late on, because what the top teams will do is they know that you're going to sit back in a low block like this against them. So they'll find ways to just almost death by 1,000 cuts. They'll find ways to keep moving you about and keep sliding you about so that eventually the gaps open up and they'll exploit that later on.
Yeah.
Anything from you, Stu, at this point?
Yeah, I think it's really important part to look at how the opposition might be feeling against these. So they're at home, they're being really compact. The frustration, what the opposition must feel when they can't break down the opposition, because even if Wolves do win the ball back, they've not got any out ball, apart from if they use space to exploit him behind. So more often than not, they might give the ball away, but because they've got lots of players in position, they're able then to go and put pressure on the ball and apply pressure in the shape again. So it's that kind of willingness of time to frustrate, to really bring the opposition upon them, to then create space in behind, to then hopefully go and exploit them on the counter.
I think just going into that point, what Stu's mentioned, I think this is the bit of footage here with Conor Cody. Again, that recognition of the sort of the patterns around, the space, time and movement that's going on in front of him. So again, that lateral movement there, making decisions, just searching for information. And again, it's just that perceptual stuff of what's going on around him, which will then obviously trigger his actions.
Yeah.
So again, is that how often do we just focus in on that individual and that sort of before type action, which ultimately is just triggering what he decides to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
Cool. So now
I think that's a great example, hints of a team defending deep to try and reduce space in behind. And obviously allowing themselves space in front to maybe exploit with the counter. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at a team, Liverpool, who allows the space in behind them by pressing high up the pitch to try and win the ball back. This is footage from the Community Shield this year, when the new rule came in around defenders being able to drop inside the box when the goalkeeper plays out from the back. So it's a short 40-second video. I'll play it all the way through. There's no illustration on this. And then we'll go through some kind of thoughts, some observations around some still frames. And then we'll play again where we might have opportunity to go and talk through. Hopefully those work. Not allowing me to play the video. Oh, there we go.
It's coming through.
So a little bit slow. I'll try and go back to the video shortly, but we'll progress onto the slide. So this is a still picture from the very same game. This is in the first half. So I've tried to shade the areas of interest on the picture. So the front line of the three forwards from Liverpool and the three midfielders in particular around the shape they're making to try and protect the central area of the pitch. Bravo's in possession with the ball, and I think it's Otamendi who's dropped in the box. But if you notice in that half of the pitch, the opposition are outnumbering Liverpool. So goalkeeper +7 versus 6 of the Liverpool players. So they want to try and keep the strength in the central area. If you look at the performance problem, what Man City are trying to cause them by Stones and Rodri trying to play in the red area to try and hopefully break lines with the pass. But Liverpool are staying compact and narrow to try and invite the ball into the wide areas for Walker. And I think it was the young lad from Ukraine.
Zinchenko.
Left back. So they wanted them to play through, but Liverpool wanted to force them out. The big one I wanted to try and focus on really was a back line, how high they are. So we understand that Bravo's capable with the ball at his feet, but maybe not as good as maybe Ederson. But by the back line being high up the pitch, yes, they're sacrificing maybe the ball in behind, but that gives them time to go and adjust and adapt and recover. But it allows all the units to be compact and connected, and it allows the Liverpool midfield three and the forward three to certainly step on to try and win the ball back higher up. One thing, what the video hopefully show when we go back into it, is that if the ball does go back into the 18-yard box, they're quite willing to allow them to have that ball, but they'll try and show the ball into wide areas. If it does go into the central area, they'll press quite aggressively to try and squeeze a ball back into an area of the pitch, either in front of them or to a wide position, which might give them some more strength. So similar to what Hint's kind of alluded to before, the space is what they're willing to leave. They're willing to leave the ball in front, so in the red shaded area, in front of them, so they're in a compact shape. They're willing to let the ball go down the side into the wide areas where they can try to squeeze across the pitch to try and occupy the outside lanes and use a line for an extra defender. But they're also quite happy for the ball to be played in behind. So you think about the player profiles of the back players they've now got available to them, certainly with the sign of Van Dijk a couple of years ago, the characteristics of the players, they're athletic, they're able to move their feet quickly with the bodies to turn and try and manage the space in behind, which then in turn allows a team to go high up the pitch to try and apply pressure to the ball. It's also important to stress that any kind of back player will only squeeze up as long as they recognise that there's pressure on the ball. So the front three being very athletic, very willing and committed to the cause around being selfless for the team allows Liverpool to effectively have a really good high press. So we're going to come on to a slide shortly around Van Dijk, around the amount of games he plays. But the question will be, how do they maintain the intensity through the season when they don't make very many changes to the personnel? And how does their in-possession strategy support their out-of-possession strategy? But also, how does their out-of-possession strategy really help their in-possession strategy? So we're going to go back to the video, have a think about some of the things we've kind of mentioned.
I think the biggest thing for me at this point, Stu, that differs from what we saw with the Wolves players is obviously the area of the field where Liverpool are defending, but the spaces that they've got to defend as well are much bigger. So the energy demand on the players to play this way, particularly the midfield and forward players, is much higher.
Yes, no, agreed totally. It's just recognising the distances, what they've got to use. So we talked around before about them not being too keen on pressing when the opposition are sinking into the box.
Yeah.
Piece of the pitch by 18 by 70 yards, which is a vast area of space. So they want to be compact and connected, but when they recognise the back line's up and they can reduce the space to 37 yards by 70, the type of players they have with the athleticism from both forwards, midfield line and the back line, and the kind of understanding and trust within the goalkeeper to manage the space between the goal and the defenders, allows him to be really effective on the front foot to try and win the ball back high.
And I think that is something. Go on, Craig.
Go on. I was saying, I think it's understanding their strengths as well, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like now bringing Van Dijk in a foot race, he's got great confidence in himself that he ain't going to get beat, or he'll be able to catch most people. So I think that just allows him to get higher as well, because he knows that if it does go in, he's got half a chance of getting back there anyway, and he can deal with it.
No, I totally agree. And I think the stats what I'm going to show on the next couple of slides, it's from 2018-19 season when we had a full season of football, and through the amount of games he played, he only committed 12 fouls, only giving 5 yellow cards away. So to win the ball cleanly, so the reading and the anticipation, the intercepting of the ball to win it cleanly, to not give free kicks away around certainly his own penalty areas is key and probably fundamental to the success of how they're playing at the moment. So again, if it does go in the central area like we talked around, they're trying to put immediate pressure on the ball to try and get the ball into a wide area, and then they'll try and regroup and be connected to be compact to try and force out wide. You'll see in a second Henderson going across to Zinchenko. He'll have a quick look down the line to see if his fullback's in a 1v1 position to try and invite it down. Zinchenko doesn't want to go there, so he goes back. And then we force a long ball, and I think it's Matip on this occasion with the high line, making first contact and hopefully the second phase of the attack where Keita can maybe get the ball and drive into the big space afforded to them. But again, the back line being high is key to the success of the other players trying to put pressure on the ball.
Yeah, I think you're right, Stu, about obviously the way that they're playing and the way that they kind of reduce the length of the field helps them with the energy. It's still that this strategy compared to the other one is still a massively energy demanding. So you've got to have a profile of player, particularly the forward players, who obviously can have impact with the pace and intensity that they can play in possession, but then immediately without rest they go into defending and trying to win the ball back for you quickly and in the way that you want. I think Liverpool have changed that strategy a little bit over the last few years as well. I think they are a little bit more strategic in how they press now compared to what they were, and perhaps that one helps them to counter-attack with the players that they've got a little bit more effectively. But also I think across a season and within games it probably conserves a bit of their energy as well.
I think it's from the from success they've had in the way they've played, both in possession to get the players in and around the ball to be connected when they give the ball away to counter press, but also how the opposition maybe set up against them and start to be a bit more compact, deeper, like we've just seen in the previous video. Yeah. But Liverpool now having opportunities maybe to start resting whilst in possession. I think one of the stats was that Van Dijk clocked up the most passes within a particular season, so it probably kind of demonstrates maybe where most passes are coming from and the way they maybe try and look to play. I think, when you look at even Trent and Robertson, the amount of switch passes they make to each other, which probably demonstrates again, the possible limited pressure they might get under to try and switch the point of attack to maybe open up a different avenue of attacking the opposition. So yeah, I think that certainly will help with the loading, where they can maybe be more of a possession-based team. But I think the beauty of how Liverpool kind of plays, it can be adaptable. They can play short to try and attract the opposition on, but also they've got a threat where they can try and play longer, more considered passes to try and open up the spaces what the opposition give them. Yeah. I think the strategy would be to try and get the ball, if possible, further away from their goal, if they can, and nearer to the oppositions. Yeah,
but thinking about the differences there, we were talking about the wide players in the Wolves team having to have like a really high top speed to be able to cover lots of ground. Clearly, they're the Liverpool players with that strategy. They're still needing to work at high speed, and they will have to sprint at times. But more and more there within what we see, it's that aggressive pressing, acceleration, strong deceleration, change direction, press again. That's the sort of physical demand that's placed on the players in that type of strategy. So a lot more strength in that ability to accelerate and brake rather than hit top speed all the time.
Yeah, and I think when we go down to the individual Van Dijk shortly, along with the other players there, they're really good at defending 1v1. So think about where that fits along the pathway, and think about how we need to try and really encourage our players to dominate 1v1s, both in attack and defence.
Yeah, with the defenders, clearly, that's where the story differs. If you look where in Mick's example where Cody was defending from, and the amount of players that were around him, clearly there's not going to be many opportunities where he's going to have to open up and sprint back into his own half at top speed. Whereas where Van Dijk's defending, there's more opportunity where the teams might try and exploit the space in behind. So he might have to accelerate and actually get up to top speed. So you're going to need defenders who can really sprint and go quickly if you're going to play the way that the Liverpool team do.
Yeah, which obviously certain impacts on the physical state. This was just a kind of stats from the 2018-19 season, which really interested me around the amount of games. If we're looking at maybe developing players who are fit for the elite game, how do we maybe prepare our players who are capable of playing 60-plus games? Not only domestic games, but also international games and European games, and what comes with the kind of difficulties around travel and rest and the kind of program what gets in place. So that's something what I'm sure will come out with the next few slides, what we're going to start talking about, but the implications on player development to try and produce players who can play at the top of the game.
Do you think that as a physical in my head, I'm just thinking that he's played that amount of games, but his physical load would be less than someone who's defended all the time? Does that have an impact?
I think it would be different, wouldn't it? Because when he does defend, perhaps some of the actions, particularly the high speed stuff, he might be exposed 1v1 a little bit more. So physical contacts and things like that. So I think it'll certainly be different.
Yeah.
To the way that other teams play. But I think that, the other thing with that, from the physical point of view is, when we're developing players, are we preparing them for, the amount of games that these players are playing? Because what you've also got to add into that for a player like Van Dijk is that, there could be tournaments that come at the end of the season. So they're not getting the summer break every summer. So the season can be kind of 11, 12 months long potentially. With the amount of games, I think some of the other top players, you're seeing them playing up to between 70 and 80 games a season. Some of these top players. Does our development pathway provide the variety of games and opposition that a top player is going to experience, but also the volume and then the physical ability to give of your best and your maximum within those games, but then have the physical capability of recovering quickly. And that comes with high levels of fitness. And that only comes with being exposed to lots of volume and variety of training and gameplay, which I know we'll come to again very shortly.
And I suppose it links to Mick's point before about Cody, doesn't it? About concentration levels. So his concentration levels going to have to be high because at times he's probably not. He's probably doing less defending at times because they'll be in possession more. So then his concentration levels have to be different because they have to be more effective to a certain degree because he's probably doing less off. And that's probably why goals conceded when he's been caught out a little bit, not very often, but have come from lack of concentration more so than different things.
And also that when you get the congested spells and the fatigue kicks in, so physically you maybe haven't fully recovered from the previous 2-3 games, but you're going into the next game, and that's when your concentration levels have got to be at their maximum.
I think again, it's the context of those 60+ games again, isn't it? Because if we look at the sort of games where you maybe you really are full out compared to the games what you may be dominating because of the capabilities of the players in like the technical, tactical side, physical, etc. Again, I think Stu, you mentioned earlier on about resting when the team are on the ball, which provides that sort of replenishment of the energy system. So again, I guess as well as looking at that volume, it's the variety of intensity within those games. Which ones have they been flat out, which ones have they been dominating, etc. So that I think needs to be consideration as well of when we're we're looking at that sort of transferring to the development sort of side of the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of the time as well, it's the intelligence of the positioning when they have got the ball in the defensive sense. So being up the pitch 1v1 or 2v1 against the opposition's defender, because both your fullbacks have gone high up the pitch to try and create the attacks. It's recognised when he does come out, and the stats are there to back it up that he wins the ball cleanly by either heading or intercepting. So his reading the game would certainly conserve a lot of energy.
Yeah, no good.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, a large part of that development understanding for players is not just about always continuing to try and make them stronger or faster, but if they learn the position and they learn their roles or role in the team, or they have a broader understanding of the tactical side of the game, they become more efficient. So they learn how to be in the right position, so they don't have to make a recovery run, or they don't get caught and then they've got to react to what the opposition are doing. So then you have got the energy conserved for when you do need to work explosively or at high intensity. So again, going back to Mick's point earlier, this is where the four corners overlap, isn't it? Like, if we spend time helping players get better tactically, technically, it can help the physical corner with their efficiency within the game.
Yep, spot on.
We're just coming towards the end of the first section before we start to talk about what might the implications of some of these modern tactics and strategies be on the developing player. I just wanted to share this slide with you. I'm a physical performance coach, so it would be amiss of me not to include a graph in a presentation. So
love a bar chart.
I've thrown that in for you, fellas. This one's just from the International Journal of Sports Medicine. It's a paper produced by Barnes et al., which shows 10-year evolution, really, of physical stats within the Premier League. And the grey bars are the kind of 10 years ago, and the black bars are the modern day trends of what's going on in the game. I think the important message is to go out there. If you look at the top three figures, they all represent sprints. So the number of sprints, the number of explosive sprints, and the sprint distances have all significantly increased over that 10-year period in the Premier League. So that could be linked to playing styles of teams, but it also means that players have just got fitter and their capability is higher to be able to keep working at a higher intensity. The players aren't covering more distance, but they are covering more high intensity distance, and they certainly are sprinting more. So it's a faster game. People are covering more ground at those kind of really high anaerobic, energy demanding elements of the game. Less time to recover before you have to go again. And so the players have to adapt and respond to that, otherwise they can't keep up with the pace of the game. And this is a big challenge then for those working in development, because potentially, the human body isn't evolving any quicker. Some people would argue that it's slowing the other way with lack of physical education and things like that within children. But the gap that we've got to bridge to get these players physically to be able to not just cope but thrive when they get into Premier League squads and teams is it's increased over the last 10 years massively. So we've got to try and think about how are we helping the players in the development phases to make sure that they're as quickly as possible bridging this gap between being a development player and being an elite Premier League player.
I think that's successful passes. Is that your successful passes there, Mick, on the left?
No, that must be me.
One on the right.
Definitely. Well, I think that's just a stat thrown in there to show not only are the physical stats changing, but also things like successful passes, so possession-based football and things like that. So the technical evolution is changing alongside the physical. And again, a lot of numbers thrown at you, lads. I know you like it. I know you like it when I throw a load of numbers at you. But I just thought this would be a useful addition to this discussion, because this is an example of a player that I worked with a few years back. So these are Premier League fixtures. The data set isn't huge to make massive inferences from, but it just provides some examples about, one, the variation in physical performance from one game to the next, but also to show you that this player had to be versatile, because sometimes he was a right back in a 4-4-2, sometimes he was a right midfielder in a 4-4-2, sometimes he played as a right wing back, a bit like in the Wolves system that you showed earlier, Craig. So again, there's a bit of that technical and tactical adaptability that the player has to have, which is important. But it's also to show that from a physical point of view, we don't know when the hardest game's going to come for that player. And sometimes it can be hard because they've got to run more distance, so they've got to have the endurance to cover more distance. And sometimes because of the opposition that they're playing against, and potentially the direct opponent, or how the tactics and strategies that the opposition employ, sometimes they have to sprint more and they have to do some more of that kind of high intensity anaerobically demanding stuff, and you don't know when that's going to come. I've highlighted in red for this player that in 3 different games across this little part of the season, this player had to run his furthest in one game, which was a 1-0 home win. He had to run his furthest high intensity distance in a 3-1 home win, and then he had his highest sprint distance in a 2-0 away game when he was playing at right back. But from a physical point of view, we need to make sure that they are ready so that when it comes to the hardest parts of the games, they don't get caught out. So even though sometimes he only has to run 250 metres in a game, he also has to be ready for when he needs to run 412 metres sprint distance in a game, and so on. So
can that cause problems? Sorry, Matt. Can that cause problems injury-wise and stuff like that if it's fluctuates too much? Do you know what I mean? If you've got Fulham there and you're say 913 high intensity distances, or you're playing against Liverpool, it's 1230, which is a massive difference, really. So if it's up and down like that all the time, how do you manage that?
It has implications if you're only preparing for the average or for the easiest games. And that's why, from a physical point of view, in the training sessions and the off-field sessions that you're doing with the players around their strength development, if you're training only in small areas, but then somebody's got to increase their sprint distance, then that can expose them to injury risk. But if you prepare them, if you've got the numbers where you know that how you play and where that player plays, what the hardest parts of his game for, he needs to stay fit for the hardest parts of the game all the time, because you don't know when those hard bits are going to come. And that helps to protect them from injury, but also in game it means that they're not going to fatigue as quickly. Whereas if they're only trained to be able to run 250 metres in a game, and you have to then run 400 metres in a game at sprint distance, that's when you can start to get problems. Either injury risk increases, or the player just becomes really fatigued and can't recover quickly enough and gets caught out. I threw that one in at the bottom, which was a comfortable 6-0 home win, just to really show that, I think the physical stats can sometimes be affected when games aren't necessarily that competitive. So it was obviously quite a one-sided result, that. And the player records like his lowest stats in the season across the board. And that's probably because, it was quite a comfortable victory for that team. So again, thinking about development, are games really competitive, and are they testing the intensity that the players have to work at? That was maybe a question that I would throw out there for our discussion as we continue on.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. I'm basically where from here really, and about how this links to the future player and certain physical attributes we need, which we've talked about around those tactics and systems of play and strategies. So how do we prepare our players to compete and be ready really for that? I guess that wide range that you was just discussing there, Matt, on the chart. So I think the next few slides really will certainly be some confirmation for the sort of types of practices that are going on in the clubs, particularly at the professional development phase. But hopefully it'll just provide some considerations really to explore further. And I certainly hopefully think that it's relevant for the younger phases as well. Some of these things will be transferable. So we talked really around that games programme, around the volume and the variety. Certainly I think it's something that's been talked about really around the number of games. I think there's a slide that will follow this with it as just a basic example. But also the variety. So I think if we're in the business of providing different experiences for the players in this development, there's some considerations or some thoughts that the programme that they're encountering at the moment is becoming a little bit too sterile. So sometimes, how do we provide opportunities or those further experiences where, are we always sort of playing +1 at the back? Stuart mentioned earlier on about Liverpool and 1v1 with Van Dijk and so on. How often, depending on I guess the context of the game when it's being played, but can we be a little bit more selective of how we maybe change the style of how we go about playing a game, and just to try and explore and expose them really more to some physical demands. The second one really to think about was, when we're watching games at the top level, and we had a brief discussion this morning with a group of PDP coaches, was, do we often sort of rescue players within the game moment? So we change the system, the numbers. So let's say it's a back 3 to a back 4, and we never enough rescue them early because we want to sort of manage the game, which is an understandable thing, and I think it's a natural thing. But how often do we maybe plan how we're going to sort of intervene, or maybe possibly not intervene, to allow players an opportunity to solve the problems in the action, in the moment? So it provides that extra experience about how they've got to look at learning from that element of the game in the moment. Yeah. We've discussed briefly around managing emotion, raising the mental game, and how to use sort of in-game specific movements, which I'll touch on in a second. And again, preparing players for the increased game pace and speed of thought. So I'll go back to my earlier point there around that searching for and recognition early around that, the technical, tactical side linked to physical and the cognitive approach. And finally, maybe some sort of considerations really around restarts in training. Some of the observations I've made around going around the academies, which I'm fortunate enough to do in my job over the past sort of 4 or 5 seasons. I think this was a little bit of statistic really around the volume of maybe that the 23s coaches and team experience really around a normal monthly cycle of games. Well, there's already a deficit there of 3 games in that approach. So again, I think that consideration again around how do we try and bridge this gap, not only from off-field activities, but also, within the context of a game, really. Yeah. Don't know if anybody wanted to add anything to that slide, lads?
I think it provides a headache as well, doesn't it? With, this is a great example to be able to demonstrate where sometimes players in the PDP phase, for example, get stuck between squads. So if you've got a first team fixture on the 1st of January and a 23s fixture on the 3rd of January there at the top, it might be that there's a young player that's maybe been on the bench for the first team on the 1st of January. So that means that from a physical point of view, they'll have done some light sessions leading up to the first team game. They might not have got on the pitch, but then they're doing light sessions leading up to a 23s game. So all of a sudden, they've gone nearly a whole week with actually out doing any hard physical work. And that evolves in a cycle, and a cycle they get caught up in kind of preparing for games, but not actually playing and not actually training that hard. And physically that hinders their development.
I think they can get lost in the system, can't they, for being a good player? I think it's one of them, like you've alluded to, just about the first team play on Wednesday, the 1st of Jan. The under 23s play the 3rd, but if he's with the first team squad, the first team have got a game on January the 4th as well.
Yeah.
So will he be involved on the Friday because the game's on the Saturday and he might have a sniff of playing in there and stuff like that? So they do get. So I suppose it's been adaptable with training programs and training loads, but that missing of learning as well at times.
Yeah.
But I think it's how do we look after those players who can get lost in the abyss, I suppose. But when they're doing good things as well.
They lose the learning opportunity, but they also very quickly lose that match sharpness, but also the physical qualities, particularly the high intensity ones, the fast twitch stuff and the stuff that requires the high speed, that can diminish very quickly. So if you get caught in that cycle, actually when you do get called upon, you can't do your best anyway, because physically you haven't trained for 3 weeks and properly, because you've been always in that cycle of possibly preparing for a game and then not playing, and so it's always the sessions you're involved in tend to be the ones that are tapering towards a game or recovering from a game. So very quickly you become deconditioned, and that increases your injury risk, but also reduces the impact and effectiveness that you can have because you're not up to that match pace.
So I suppose it's linking back. Sorry, Vic, that one there about they're playing on the Monday, quite a few 23s game as well. So sometimes if they're involved in that squad on the Saturday, then they haven't played. So the players who are not playing are in on the Sunday. They do a tougher session to top up on the Sunday, but then they've got the game Monday. So can that add to doing too much the day before? And then they're playing a game, so that could add to injury as well. So it's really hard, I think, to manage that load when keeping them involved in the manager's eye, but then keeping them involved as well.
Absolutely, but it's essential to find ways to help the individual player. If it is a talented player, and it usually it is those that get caught up, like you say, because they're in with a shout of it being in and around the first team as well. We've got to find ways to keep them physically able to deal with the demands of both Premier League training and playing with Premier League players as well in this scenario.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, lads. I think that's a sort of constant sort of problem, or an area that the coaches are looking to sort of try and solve, really. So I think as far as a bit of maybe an intervention or a consideration again around how do we sort of maximise the time on the grass, certainly for some of the players that are in this sort of this system of what we've just discussed there. So again, I know that a lot of clubs are practicing in this and they'll be familiar with it, around trying to represent the sort of game pace in training, so the highest intensity periods of a game. And again, that will all be dependent on your tactics and strategies again, and the style of play and the range of physical capabilities you're looking to produce. But certainly that high intensity, as it says on the grass, it's a decrease in decision making time, so it's starting to tax the thinking skills. There's less time on the ball, the actual execution of once they've decided to act has got to be spot on. There's more physical work being done, again dependent on what they're going after, and increasing the speed of actions, which you've alluded to in your bar chart earlier on. More decisions made, and again, how often do we try and, bearing in mind we've got to protect players from injury, but how do we keep nudging them to that point where not only are we testing them, like physically, but also psychologically under fatigue, and how to manage the momentum of a game, for instance, around them tactics and strategies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then just as a bit of a focus, there's a lot of off-field work being practiced now around the clubs. But I just wanted to sort of shine a light a little bit more on trying to replicate this thinking side of the game, the mental effort, integrated with the high physical effort. So I know you're going to touch on later, Matt, around a bit of a physical continuum. Yeah. I'm just going to try and focus on sort of more game-related type practices, just for coaches to consider, really. So the first one really was around sort of practice design, trying to get some repetition really of the physical demands, tactics, strategies, etc., relevant to the players, what they need, and again within the context of the game, the realism, and something Stuart mentioned earlier on around how often do we view these 1v1 tactics not only in training but in game. So instead of +1 as a defender at the back there, we've got sort of 1v1 situations. So we're looking at that decision making and certainly in game specific movements. But again, I just a small one I picked up early a while ago was around searching. So we're searching for the most sort of paying attention to those most useful cues, getting rid of the noise, so to speak. Is that an area that we lose sight of? Because I know that I think what gets measured gets noticed, as you've previously alluded to, Matt, with your charts and your figures.
Yeah.
But do we not notice the things which are harder to measure, which are these perceptual skills, which links to the decision that the players make, which obviously links then to how they execute the movement. And I think Stu mentioned earlier on about if I want to preserve energy, how am I getting into the right position to sort of limit the amount of running I have to do? So in the example here, the figures I've just lifted on the touchline there, the actual yardage is just lifted from one of Stu's earlier photos. I think this is all stage and age specific, really. So it's not so much the yardage there as the specific outcome. It's just that zone A is longer in length than zone B. So the team that are attacking the yellow team in this instance, it's just offering them more of an invitation to utilise that space with a forward pass. So we've narrowed the pitch up, we've made it longer. There's no symmetry there. It's the actual zone, like I say, zone A is longer. So that could be, again, relevant to the age and stage of the players. But I see a lot of symmetry at times. I think we quite like it as coaches. But in this instance, if we're talking about a constraint to the practice or offering an invitation to act, then obviously the ball can be played into space. That's what's available. It's up to the players to take that. But again, it'll expose hopefully the centre backs there, the red centre backs, recognising the triggers. There's no pressure on the ball in this instance. Is there a threat of a runner on the shoulder? Those acute signals, which is paramount really from the searching pattern, which will influence his decision so that he can get into his foot stride, but also that foot race there as well. So if we need more exposure to that, does that extra length on the pitch provide that? And if you put a constraint on or condition on the practice where the Reds, if they're attacking, all have to be up to that halfway line, then hopefully you'll increase the repetition of that.
Brilliant.
So it's something that when I go around the clubs and we talk about what's called individual learning plans or individual development plans, do we often see them in isolation as unopposed? Or do we see the implementation of those ILPs, IDPs, whichever terminology the clubs use, in the context of a game?
Yeah.
So it's an integration of technical, tactical work, etc., and basically all game related responses. So I don't know what your thoughts, lads, are. It's just an idea really of those 3 R's on the top.
And the situation that you're showing and describing there, Mick, if you think back to Stu's example of how Liverpool play, and then you've got kind of the defensive line defending high. Well, when you talk about game pace for centre halves who are playing in that way, then probably the highest demand that's placed on them at certain points in the game is maybe a little 1v1 tussle there, but then the ball gets sent over the back and the player gets away, and then they've got like you say, then it's a foot race. So the centre half then got to turn and sprint. Now, if your two halves of the field there were of equal length, so they were both 40 yards, well, there's a goalkeeper there, so you're talking about maybe the player might not get an opportunity to get up to full sprinting speed. So actually, they're not going to be training high speed, the sprint speed running, maximum sprint speed, which if players don't get exposed to that, one, they don't become skilled at sprinting fast, and two, there's a higher injury risk because they're not conditioned to sprinting fast as well. Whereas if you've set that up where you've actually increased the distance for when the ball goes over the top and they've got a race, they can actually get up to those higher speeds and practice sprinting at the higher speeds with repetition because of the condition that you've put on it. So again, a great example of how you can integrate the physical and tactical demands on the players in a training practice. The game demands for the other example that we've seen today, around the forward players. How do you replicate the demands on Liverpool's forward players, for example, or Wolves forward players, where they're going to have to do some high repetition counter-attack sprinting? Well, in this example, you've got the sprinting for the wide forward player. Other practice designs, how can you get the demand placed on the players for the hardest parts of their game? They get the highest game pace in their game around maybe losing the ball and pressing. So that there's other ways that you can manipulate it for those type of players as well. But I think that's a great example of how it links into the physical stuff as well.
I think. Thanks, Matt. I think. Sorry, Stu, go on.
I suppose it connects so you talked about individual learning plans. I suppose it connects also the centre back to the centre forward. So if the centre back's been encouraged to get across the halfway line before maybe they can score a goal and get more kind of reward for doing that, it also places a massive importance on the forward players putting pressure on the ball, because if there's no pressure on the ball and the centre half's up to the halfway line, it's given a lot of space. So then you start developing relationships, not also within the unit, but within the team, around forwards recognising that if the back players are to be up high and the risk that maybe poses for the opposition team to try and exploit, then the forward players have to put immediate pressure on the ball to try and win the ball back. So I think it's a good connection.
Yeah, I think so. Some great points, and I think again the benefit, if you then look at the team coming the other way, the red team, you've got obviously a more compact space. So the centre back for the yellow team defending there at the back, he may need more ILP stuff about getting tight, short, sharp movements, quick accel, decel, holding players off. Your strikers, your red strikers at that end might need more work on combination, quick play and movement. So again, you can cater for maybe a couple of sort of ILPs for, depending on the space, I guess, the time and the movement that's allowed really. So I think you can bullseye 2 or 3 players there, depending on who needs what, linked to the actual context of the game. So some thoughts around that.
Do you think a practice like this as well could help to compensate where maybe the games program isn't as varied? So maybe players aren't getting this in the games where somebody's knocking a ball forward long and there's space in behind, and so manipulating your training games and practices like this can maybe provide that variety for the players if they're not getting it in the games program.
Yeah, and I think again is if we're using that and we want sort of sometimes players making good decisions linked to what we've been talking about implicitly, then you're providing, they're having to solve these problems on the go really, and then I think it's up to us as coaches to provide a little bit of help and guidance if they're not quite getting it right. So, okay.
Yeah, I suppose it links, there as well about what you were saying earlier about do we rescue them too soon? So if you are practicing that in training, and it does go to the game and you're playing that way, being a high press and bringing players up, you allow it to happen as well because they've got to practice it in real life and real terms as well to get that realism more. So do we give them opportunity to practice or do we rescue too early like your point before?
Okay, good. So I think this is my last slide really around restarts in practice again as I go around the grounds. And I think again is sometimes we see goals being scored in this zone B here. Usually we restart from zone A, keeper, the grey one at the top end. And I think sometimes I'm not sure where it's almost a procedure we follow. It keeps the tempo of the session moving reasonably well. It's a reward for the red team scoring goals. I'm thinking there, if we're talking about tactic and strategies and trying to get out some different physical returns, it's an understanding of why we're making, starting from that top end. And again, just some considerations around alternatives. So I just look at this one really, where if a goal's scored, in that zone B there against the yellow team, and we restart with the great goalkeeper in zone A, he's got a 3v1. So I would think the cognitive demands, not really stretched there. It allows them just to restart. So players will predominantly be in zone B. So if we look back at the previous footage, that might be Liverpool now building against a Wolves team already sort of camped in zone B. So you get more repetition of a tactics and strategies there, but linked to a physical demand where Liverpool are going to have to beat this block. Okay, if you wanted to spin that round and decide that the context of the game, say Wolves were losing this, then rolling it out from the grey goalkeeper, you're going to have to apply a real high press straight away. So you're getting some leg work up to the halfway line. You're being aggressive, so you're replicating some physical demands, what you may be going after. So you've got, a bit of a transfer there. I think the second one would be a restart with the grey goalkeeper playing a long ball into zone B. So this might be a case of providing those experiences again. I had a great discussion this morning with a few of the lads from the clubs, where we've got a Category 1 club who are playing, sort of getting experience to a lot of passing and building from the back. Yet the first team are in League One, where the style of play generally tends to be a little bit more direct. So does this restart to offer more of a challenge, body contact again, looking for second ball as a bit of a restart, which is then going to expose the players around there, reading the game, do I intercept, can I go and challenge, and so on. And then the final one would be the red team have scored. I'm just going to give them a bit of a reward with an attacking corner or a free kick or a throw-in. So basically, if your data from the analysis of your game suggests that you're not retaining the ball very well in this attacking third, why would you restart back up with that in zone A? So if you want more repetition around the performance problem, and surely you need more repetition. And if you build that up, if you're always starting back in zone A over a period of a season, how much time are you wasting on the grass when your data's telling you don't retain it very well, you're not recovering, it gives if the corner's not taken correctly, the throw-in's not taken correctly, there's a chance you're going to get countered, your recovery's not great, the leg speed's not great, the decision when to go. So I think from your data and your analysis, what are some of the performance problems, and are you being a bit sort of, you got a bit more knowledge and understanding about what's the rationale behind why you're starting in those, what sort of physical returns linked to the cognitive approach are you getting, just to provide you with more repetition so you're getting full value of the time spent on the grass, really.
Yeah, I think, from some of those things you've talked about where the restarts happen, if you're putting the ball into areas where it's closer to the opponent's goal, and the intensity of play is going to automatically go up as well, Mick, isn't it? Or it might even be, if you're the Oranges, the Wolves there, you might even restart it as if you're giving it to the Reds, but the Wolves have got half a chance of nicking it, and then you kind of almost constraining the practice so that they have to counter attack. So you're getting them to kind of think about that transition and the distance they are away from goal and that sort of thing. So I think, physical point of view, you're right in terms of, well, what are the problems that you're seeing in the game, and how can you restart and recreate that in the way that you design the practice to prepare the players for the most intense parts of the game. So going back to that game pace point that you made.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I think this is just the final slide before we sum it up, guys. But I just wanted to share this. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I think we talk about practice design and quite a lot from a tech-tac point of view. But I think to get coaches to think about how are they working with their players to integrate this physical continuum into their practice design as well, so that the practices that you described there, Mick, aren't quite the game itself, but they're game-related practices. So they would be on this continuum. They would sit towards the right-hand side of the slide. For me, that helps the players. Not only can you constrain the practice to get them to work at game intensity, but it also gets them working with game-specific movements linked to game-relevant decisions. So when you're working to that right-hand side, when you're integrating practices on the grass in a game like Ware with the performance problems that you've set, it's more chaotic, but it's more specific, and it's helping the players to become movement efficient as well, because they're learning body positions and they're learning the skills that they need to be able to move with efficiency on the field and be in the right place. But I think from a physical point of view as well, if you want to get somebody to be quicker, more powerful, if you want them to get strong so they can repeatedly press, you've also got to set up practices on the field and off the field to the left-hand side of this continuum that help to build their capability. So some of the fundamental physical requirements of strength, of speed, of endurance. So how are you balancing the program so that you're getting a development for the players around both the left-hand side and the right-hand side of this practice continuum from a physical point of view? So the left-hand side, you'll get more repetition of leg strength, of power output, but the right-hand side, you're going to get more realism. So a bit, it really links into the previous slides that you've talked about, but just layering that on from the physical point of view.
Brilliant. I think it's just that last slide to end up of what we started, really. I know we talked about modern tactics and strategies. We've looked at Wolves, how they play. We've looked at Liverpool as well, those modern trends and how tactics and strategies link to player profiling. So always linking it back to your context and what is achievable with that. But we always go back to what is tactically desirable. So how do you want to play? So if you want to play that low block, what is it? Is it technically achievable? Can your players do it? Is it physically achievable for that as well? So do they bring Chorium to do it? Have they got Van Dijk like Liverpool did? So things like that. We've also touched on stats, Matt's lovely graphs. We all love a graph and a stat, but some great stats there which give you context really around why you do what you're doing and shows you a great insight into, well, this happens in certain games. Players have to be ready. If we're looking at the end in mind, and we're always looking at the end in mind for our players, are we giving them that sort of ability to actually, with the end in mind, to cope when they get to that top level and play in the first team? We've also had a bit of a practice design to achieve objectives. Mick talks about some great little practices there. Realism, relevance, repetition of just practice. Can we get that and then recreate that at game pace? So it allows our physical capabilities to be brought higher, so then we can do it in the game. And then we've had the physical continuum, easy for me to say, at the end there. So hopefully it's been useful. Hopefully it's made you think. Much appreciated for the other four lads, Stu, Mick, Matt, and obviously Rambo in behind, making sure we stick to time and everything's working strong. But hopefully you're staying safe at home. And if there's anything from the lads, anything else from the lads?
No, thanks guys.
Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care.